would have the opportunity at the end of today to wrap up perhaps with a really vibrant discussion with everyone. If I could invite the panelists to the podium, to the head table, Dr. Stevenson, I forgot, Ava Tomlin, Elin Parkinson, Franklin McDonald, Paul Banks, please. Missing one person, Mr. McDonald. Okay. He and I were having a good chat, remembering old times in sustainable development work throughout the region. I'd like to get started, because I know we're already running a bit late. You know, I'd written a few comments as an introduction to this panel, and then Dr. Trotz delivered his speech this morning, and he took half of my comments. And then I said, okay, I'll rewrite it and refocus. And then Marta presented on the first panel and took the rest. So there is nothing new I have to tell you, other than to say that this panel this afternoon is going to be quite interesting, primarily because of its diversity in presentations and the work that these fine people do across the region. I'm going to get started because I don't want us to miss the opportunity at the end to have a Q&A. I'd invite Dr. Stevenson. She's the head of the physics department of UWI at UWI Mona, and comes with 13, that magic number 13, years of work in climate change, climate variability, extremes. She's going to talk to you about the science of climate change. And at the end, you will all become experts in this topic.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Oh my goodness. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is so good that you're going to be speaking with me as I go through this presentation. I'm not sure who has the controls. Am I allowed to have the controls? Thank you, sir. So I'm going to speak about climate and Jamaica. I'm Tanisha Stevenson. I'm from the Climate Studies Group at the University of the West Indies. So I'm going to tell you 3 things you already know, and I'm going to tell you anyway because you have to listen to me. And the information source is the State of the Caribbean Climate, the State of the Jamaican Climate 2015. It's an evaluation of the state of knowledge of climate for Jamaica, historical climate, and projections of the future. Thing number 1 I want to highlight is that our climate is changing. We can already tell that it's getting hotter. Can you say amen? You feel hotter, don't it? Talk truth. What we notice is that our minimum temperatures are increasing faster than our maximum temperatures, and that daily temperature range has been decreasing. Our climate is changing. Another way we see this is that our rainfall is a lot more variable. Last year we were wetter than normal. 2 years before that we were drier than normal. That variability has increased. And that is one of the dominant signals we see when we look at rainfall records for Jamaica. Just to say, we also have decadal variability, groups of years where we're wetter than normal, drier than normal. We notice that we have been experiencing more extremes. I'll just point to the figure on the left-hand side, that between 1980 and 1999, we had those storm tracks passing about in 100 kilometers of Jamaica. But when we look at 2000 to the present, we had a lot more storms passing through our direction. So that is to say, in this climate that we're experiencing, the change, we're experiencing more extremes. Another thing we notice is that we have been having higher sea levels. The longer records suggest 1.6 millimeters per year, shorter records up to 3.5 millimeters per year. And this is pretty consistent with what we see for the region and for the globe. So what is the message we're seeing with this changing climate? hotter, more variable rainfall, more extremes, higher sea levels. Ladies and gentlemen, when we put that together, that pattern we're seeing is this emergence of a new climate regime that we can characterize as unfamiliar. It means that as our climate becomes unfamiliar, it changes that pattern of planning that we're used to. The main point, ladies and gentlemen, that climate basis which we use for regional planning is no longer valid because we are seeing a change in our climate. We just have to look at the headlines last year to see how sensitive we are to climate. No area of life can we identify that has not been impacted by the changes we have been seeing. So yes, you already know that the climate is changing, and one of those key messages is that it's suggesting to us an emergence of a new climate regime that is marked by the unfamiliar. It means that climate basis, that climate baseline, that reference period we normally use for planning is no longer valid, we would suggest. Point number 2, our climate will keep changing. What are the changes we can expect? Hotter temperatures. The graph on the left is showing you that irrespective of the best case and worst case scenarios, temperatures will increase towards the end of the century. The same is true globally. This shows us Jamaica. The same is true for Jamaica. Not only hotter, but also the suggestion of drier conditions. Again, the message, ladies and gentlemen, from that graph is irrespective of the best case and worst case scenarios, we still have that variability, we still have that tendency towards drier conditions. Another thing we tend to see as we look at these models, these computer models that suggest to us what may happen in the future, is more intense extremes. So we can't speak definitively to the frequency of the extremes, but the intensity is what there's convergence on. Intensity increases, higher rainfall rates, stronger winds. The change in climate that is anticipated, the anticipation is even higher sea levels. Again, what we're seeing is scenarios for the north coast, for Jamaica, and the south coast. Again, irrespective of scenario, there is a picture of increasing sea levels towards the end of the century. So today, as in historical records, we see a hotter world, a hotter Jamaica, more variable rainfall, more extremes, sea levels continue to rise at a rate of 3.5 millimeters per year. What is the anticipation for tomorrow from the models is that we still have those increasing temperatures up to 4 degrees Celsius increases. We still are more variable, but tending towards drier conditions. Intensity of extremes increases, and sea level rise continues, up to 1 meter for some scenarios. The suggestion, ladies and gentlemen, is our future climate may very well be unprecedented, beyond what we have seen. So our historical records suggest the emergence of a new climate regime, and as we look at climate models, the suggestion is an entrenchment of this new regime. So we look at, when we do actually factor climate into our planning, we notice that the climate that we have already seen is no longer the baseline on which we can plan for the future. So the suggestion is, ladies and gentlemen, that the climate bounds, the climate limits have changed and are no longer valid when we talk about national and regional planning. This unprecedented climate we anticipate in the future suggests that we will have unprecedented impacts. So yes, we know our climate is changing, and we want to suggest it is suggesting to us an emergence of a new climate regime. We want to suggest that too, as the climate continues to change, it is suggesting to us an entrenchment of a new climate regime that we can describe as unprecedented. The baselines of yesterday are no longer valid. 3, our climate demands some change. And one of the things we notice, ladies and gentlemen, that there's an increased exposure of individuals towards climate change. That is to say, we're seeing new vulnerable groups emerging as we look at the historical records of climate change. Some of those vulnerable groups include the poor, the elderly, or security guards who have to endure intense temperatures for long periods, biodiversity, heritage sites, we find new vulnerable groups emerging. This map is to show one of the vulnerable groups that we could speak to, squatter developments. Look at the overlap in squatter developments shown in black, I think it is. The red shows areas of landslide. The blue shows areas of historical flood events. So that is to say, ladies and gentlemen, as we look at the change that climate demands, we're noticing increased exposures. This is one such example. Not only increased exposure, but we can talk about a diminished capacity to cope. The table shows that just for Jamaica, 2001 we're hit, 2002 we're hit again, 2004 we're hit twice. When you think it can't get any better. That's a joke, man, ladies and gentlemen. Laugh no, man. So what we find out is the magnitudes of the events are changing, are increasing. There's a multiplicity of the events, and the recurrence of these events are increasing. Increased exposure, diminished capacity. We want to suggest, and one of the studies suggests to us, that if there is inaction, climate change is going to cost us more than we're willing to pay. 22 billion by the 2050s, possibly 46 billion by the end of the century. So our message, ladies and gentlemen, climate demands change. 3 areas of change we can talk about: mitigation. We must take efforts to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Adaptation, we're already committed to some climate change. We must position ourselves and others to live in this changed climate. And education, we must engender some behavioral change. We want our populace to be conscious of the change that has occurred and will continue to occur, to be convinced that yes, there have been changes, and to be convicted enough to do something about it. Putting these all together, ladies and gentlemen, we have an expansion of the effects of this new climate regime, and it's demanding of us urgent action. And one of the things that changing climate suggests to us, ladies and gentlemen, is our belief about who is impacted is changing. New vulnerable groups are emerging. Our beliefs of yesterday are no longer valid. So 3 things we want to highlight about climate change. Our climate is changing. We have this emergence of a new regime. Our climate will continue to change. We have this entrenchment of a new regime. Our climate demands change. There's an expansion of the challenge that is met as we respond to climate change. So our basis of past climate planning is no longer valid. The bounds have changed. The beliefs of who are impacted have changed. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention.
Wasn't that the clearest explanation of climate science that you've ever heard? And aren't you all now climate science experts?
You can't work me out of a job.
I shall not. You shall train them. Our next presenter is not Pip Decker. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us. We're joined instead by Ava Tomlin, the Regional Director for Jamaica for BMR Energy. Ava has over 20 years of experience as an operations leader and project manager in aviation, construction, and utilities sectors. Prior to joining BMR Energy, Ava was Jamaica's Public Services Parish Manager for Manchester and St. Elizabeth, managing all aspects of service delivery. She has also served as the Director of Engineering and Planning for the Airport Authority of Jamaica, where she managed the facilities of an international airport and 4 domestic airports. Ava holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of the West Indies and an MBA in Operations Management and Strategy from the University of Rochester's Simon Business School. Ava?
Just forward.
Green is go.
Green is go and all right.
15 minutes. Oh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, All right, she got a better response than me. So let's try this again. I'm not Pip, I'm not from New York. I'm from Mandeville. So good afternoon, everyone. All right, thank you. All right, so today I am representing BMR Energy, as you have heard. And our presentation, or my presentation, will be on building resilience to climate change. And there are three main tenets to this: planning, preparedness, and recovery. So for the presentation, what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about BMR Energy. Then I am going to talk about our experiences in terms of our plant in Jamaica, where we have designed and built what we think is resiliency into the plant that we have in Jamaica. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our recovery efforts in the US Virgin Islands, and then what BMR plans to do in the future. And that is really tiny writing. Let's hope I can see this. All right, so a little bit of background on BMR Energy. BMR Energy was established in 2012 by a group of very experienced power generation providers. Our principals have over 70 years combined experience in developing over 10,000 megawatts of power generation experience. Included in this is over 850 megawatts of combined greenfield renewable experience, and we have done this in the US, in the Caribbean, and in other territories. BMR's primary business focus includes the development, financing, acquisition, and operation of energy infrastructure assets in the Caribbean and Latin America. We focus on regional markets in which there is a need for development and operational expertise, and where there is a limitation of capital. Today, BMR owns and operates approximately 45 megawatts of renewable energy, primarily in the Caribbean, and this includes our 36 megawatt flagship project in St. Elizabeth. We continue to look for opportunities in the region to grow. So, this flagship project that I told you about in St. Elizabeth, it is the BMR Jamaica wind project, and it is a 36 megawatt operational wind farm in the southwestern coast of St. Elizabeth. For those of you who are familiar with St. Elizabeth, it is on 86 acres of land in between the Hampton and Monroe colleges. This is currently the largest privately funded operational plant in Jamaica. Renewable energy plant in Jamaica. Got to make that distinction, right? Oh, Lord, they're not working with me at all. But anyway. All right. So this project is a ridgeline project with 11 Vestas 3.3 V111 machines on 84-meter towers. At current, the wind facility produces approximately 120 gigawatt hours per annum. This electricity is sold into the national grid via JPS, and we have a 20-year PPA with the Jamaica Public Service Company. Additionally, we're actively developing utility-scale solar projects in Jamaica as part of the future procurement for the national grid. We also work with commercial and industrial customers in Jamaica and in the region, and who are looking to reduce operating expenses related to their high energy costs. As a part of this effort, BMR looks at utilizing solar voltaic and battery technology applications for these clients. So, we know that there are very many benefits to renewables, right? Right. So, I'm just going to highlight a few for this project in Jamaica. Naturally, it's low-cost energy. When we bidded for this, we were the lowest cost energy into the grid at 12.9 cents. At current, we account for approximately 3% of power delivery into the island. As everybody here knows, I am sure, we significantly reduce the reliance on fossil fuels. Our savings are approximately 5 million barrels of oil and over $500 million that will be spent on the importation of fuel costs over the 20-year life of the project. And I'm going to stop because somebody must clap for that. In addition to that, there are zero emissions from the power generation from wind in Malvern. And this is a significant deviation from what we have known in Jamaica. This was a project that was valued at 89.6 million US dollars. And so, of course, this represented serious foreign direct investment in Jamaica. There was increased spending in the community naturally, and there were local jobs, many hundreds of local jobs. In fact, 90% of the labor for this project came from Jamaica, and over 50% of that 90% came from Manchester and St. Elizabeth. I'd ask you to clap again, but you're not taking me on. All right. So, we developed this project. How did we plan resiliency into this project? So with the siting and design of this new plant, we included the ability for to withstand extreme weather events such as hurricanes. The BMR site was sited west of where many of our hurricanes had passed. Our wind turbines are Class 1 machines. Class 1 turbines are rated to withstand the highest wind loads. BMR selected a Class 1B to handle additional turbulence that can be experienced with high winds. Additionally, much of the project's electrical system is buried underground. You will notice like a lot of the JPSCO plants, I'm sorry, is this any better? Still hearing a background? Oh well. A lot of the JPS distribution and transmission systems are overhead. Ours are underground, and that feeds into and builds into the resiliency. Additionally, extra grounding was deployed to ride through not only a storm, but also hurricane events in general. So we all know that the hurricane season in Jamaica is from June to November, and we tend to see increased lightning activity. So each year, we try to build resilience into that by making sure that our grounding readings are well. And this was quite a logistical feat that we're proud of. Our blades are 180 feet long, and they're one solid piece. So we chose to barge them down to Port Kaiser and then to truck them to the site. And while the blades are long, they are the most advanced machines in the Caribbean, and they are rated to withstand a Category 4 hurricane. Thank you. All right, so that was when we're doing the design. We have hurricane season every year, June to November. What do we do to prepare? So one of the first things that we do is around May or April, we actively engage with our primary stakeholders. Our primary stakeholders are the grid operator, JPS, of course the general public, and our first responders. At our facility, we have installed storm shutters that naturally will respond to a Category 4 hurricane. We have a full-time landscaping crew that not only ensures that there's no loose debris leading up to the storm, but also that our drains are clear because flooding will also be an issue. And of course, in terms of planning, we have a hurricane readiness plan in place. And what does this entail? It includes taking the plant offline and securing all essential equipment prior to the arrival of the storm or the landing of the hurricane, as we call it in Jamaica. We had the opportunity to test this out 2 years ago when Hurricane Matthew came and did that nice, the diversion to Haiti. Nice for Jamaica, not so nice for Haiti. Additionally, we have satellite cell phones on site, along with beds, food, shelter, first aid supplies in the event that our staff is unable to make it home. And I'd like to point out here that a part of our preparation is to make sure that the staff gets home in order to protect their property and also to help to protect the life of your loved ones. We are an industrial facility, so we have an emergency generator that is checked regularly to ensure that we can respond as necessary to start up following a storm. So, recovery. Restoring service following a storm is critical to the hurricane recovery. BMR has procedures to bring the plant back from a black start. Does anyone know what a black start is? Black start. A black start is when the plant is totally offline. So we're totally disconnected from the grid, and we have done a total shutdown. So that means we're going to have to start from scratch. And so that's what we have an entire procedure for. One of the things that we do, because we're an island nation and we do have challenges getting items into the island, is that we have an overcapacity of spares on island, so we can respond more quickly and in an optimal time, just in case we do happen to have a landfall in terms of hurricane or any other natural disaster. And additionally, not only is the spares, it is important that we have the right type of equipment, right personnel in a timely manner, so that we can restore functionality to the plant and also provide essential services to JPS and the wider Jamaica. So, that was us talking about recovery in theory, because Jamaica has not been hit in the 2 years that we have been operational. However, last month, we purchased a damaged solar plant in the US Virgin Islands, actually in St. Croix. It is a 4 megawatt solar plant. It was damaged extensively by Hurricane Maria, just in case anybody in here named Maria, in late 2017. And we're currently attempting to restore it to nameplate capacity. The project is expected to be completed before the end of this year, and we expect that it will have a significant impact on operations in St. Croix. As with all the projects that we do, BMR focuses on the plant's future resilience for the next storm, for the next natural disaster. Thank you all very much.
See how fabulously on time we all are with our presentations. This group is doing excellent. If we think about Ava's presentation and the investment that they've put in to be climate smart and climate ready, how many of us are doing the same? How many of us need to do the same? The right answer to the second one is all. Our next presenter, Elon Parkinson, is not at the table anymore. Do we go to the next? 1 second. Keeping it real. Our next two presenters, Franklin and Paul, are going to co-present on DRR and insurance. If I could introduce the two of them just briefly. Franklin is a geologist by training. He has a long and distinguished career in environmental and disaster management. For more than 30 years, he has designed and implemented programs and projects in engineering, geology, landslide and erosion control, hazard and risk assessment, disaster loss reduction policies, disaster preparedness, emergency response, and economic rehabilitation and recovery efforts. In July 1979, he was instrumental in the founding of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Jamaica's national focal point for preparedness and disaster management. In his capacity as director, he was responsible for setting up the systems and organizational arrangements to reduce the effects of extreme events on Jamaica's population and economy. He is credited with establishing the standard by which all disaster offices in the region were measured. He went on to serve as the manager for the project that designed and conceptualized SEDEMA, the Caribbean's regional disaster management agency. He's joined by Paul Banks, who is an associate of the Chartered Insurance Institute in the UK. He has a 30-year career as a general insurance broker, including a stint in England with Lloyd's, and subsequently a director of the then largest Jamaica firm, International Insurance Brokers Limited. He formed General Insurance Loss Adjuster Banks and Company in 2007, following his successful 7-year tenure as the managing director and minority shareholder of McLaren's Global Claims Services, a Jamaican subsidiary. He has handled all types of property, business interruption, motor crime liability, and marine claims, and personally settled hundreds of hurricane claims, most recently over 500 in St. Martin and St. Kitts during Hurricanes Irma and Maria. As I mentioned, it's a co-presentation, and I invite Mr. MacDonald.
Thank you very much, moderator. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a joint presentation, and I will start. Paul will present, and I will do a quick wrap-up. As you heard in the introduction, I am not a climate specialist, but I've spent a lot of time looking at issues to do with risk reduction and resilience building in many parts of the Caribbean. So my remarks today are going to be, in a sense, loosely based on a paper I produced for the people responsible for another part of public infrastructure in the Caribbean, using one particular way to look at things, the port operators. About 2 years ago, I did a quick scan of some of the issues it seemed to me were important for them, and I think many of those issues are also important for the broadcasting fraternity. The sort of overriding and overwhelming piece of evidence we can focus on is the fact that we are seeing, as a consequence, we think, of climate change, more severe hurricanes, which intensify more rapidly than they have in the past and last longer. When I wrote my piece in 2016, we had never experienced a Category 5 hurricane in the insular Caribbean, and that's worth thinking about. The observation period for which we have scientific measurements in the Caribbean is not long. The observation period for which we have written records is only a few hundred years. But in that period of time, we have not seen a Category 5 in the Caribbean until last year when we saw 2. So I hope my colleague on my immediate left, who has wind farms designed for Cat 4, has taken a hard look at hurricane tracks across Jamaica in the last 100 years. In particular, there's a November 1912 hurricane which went from Black River to Montego Bay. The eye was simultaneously over Black River and Montego Bay, suggesting the eye was at least that distance of miles, roughly about 35 miles wide. Because in fact, what is emerging from the scientific reviews is that extreme hurricanes have been around in the past, and we probably need to drill down into more of the historic data to make sure that, in fact, the assumptions we have made about hurricane peak wind speeds, etc., A, are correct, and B, that when we top them up because of climate change, which one meteorologist has suggested to me, that a hurricane now is like a hurricane on steroids. But we need to figure out what the base level was. And we have severe hurricanes in the past which are understudied. In particular, there's a so-called Great Hurricane of 1780, which struck Barbados and hit every other Caribbean island as it recurved essentially over the Eastern Caribbean. Most of the historic records speak only to its effect on the British and French fleets, and very little about its impact on plantations and slave dwellings, etc., and ports and harbors. So the first point I want to get across to everyone is that the broadcast media, the media in general, and the public authorities probably need to do a better job of drilling down into the historic extremes and making sure we have put them all together as well as we can. Most of the hurricane catalogs in the Caribbean were compiled by the Cubans. I think Alvarez, over a 20 or 30-year career in the Cuban university system. And there probably is an opportunity for going back into that data and making sure we have a full appreciation of the extent and impacts of extreme hurricanes in our historic past. I'm going to make a second point about wider observations, because while this forum is devoted to climate change, we should appreciate the fact, as we saw in January 2010, that we occasionally do have other things happen to us, including earthquakes. And if you follow the global earthquake literature, you will see that it would appear that we have had more earthquakes of high magnitude in the last 15, 20 years, starting about the turn of the century. As a geologist, let me just share with you that there's a concern in the earth science community that some of the assumptions we have made about strain accumulation in the upper crust of the earth may be a little bit out. And this may be the reason that we're seeing earthquakes capable of generating tsunamis in more places over the last few decades. Again, the minister this morning referred to culture. I'm a scientist, and you must appreciate that all human endeavors include culture. The culture of scientists is to look for things with numbers. Here's the thing with numbers. The instrument used to measure the size of earthquakes was invented in about 1890. If you quickly work that out, you will see that essentially we have about 130 years of instrumental records of earthquakes. That is not a lot of time. So as we drill into the plate tectonics theory and apply it to the Caribbean, we've ended up with a fairly respectable prediction made about 15 years ago now, that the fault which joins Jamaica and Hispaniola is capable of generating earthquake of magnitude 7 at any time at either end. We saw an earthquake of Mach 7 near Port-au-Prince, Haiti. We are assured that was not the one. So that the powers that be in this part of the world need to look at the question of what sorts of impacts such a repeat event would have. I want to raise these because we are here talking about resilience building and loss reduction, and it's not confined, as my second point was trying to point out, to climate change. Now, the third point I wanted to make was that given these circumstances, it seems that we need to be very systematic about forensics. Forensics for me means we look at events and pull them to pieces and figure them out. Last year's event was looked at very closely by the insurance sector. Paul is going to describe some of what they observed. And after he makes his remarks, I'm going to come back with just a few more closing remarks, because I really do want to get across to the broadcasting fraternity that there is a lot of uncertainty we need to communicate together and with the public. And communicating uncertainty requires a lot of attention and the full understanding of the worldview, cultural assumptions being made in the public we serve, and also in the people who work in the sector. So I'm going to now hand over to Paul, and he will tell you some of the detail of what happened last year. Then I will do a quick wrap-up to look at some of the other things we may want to put down on our agenda for action.
Thank you, Miles Franklin. Madam Secretary, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. As a loss adjuster, I think my industry looks at climate change and the effects and property damage from a different perspective. Sometimes I tell people we are akin to a junker or a turkey buzzard on a dry tree waiting for something to die. And therefore, all these events that we speak about, hurricanes, etc., unfortunately, that's how we make our money. But what it has done for me in my time as a loss adjuster is for me to be on spot to see hurricanes Ivan, Dean here, and more recently, those in the northeastern Caribbean last year, particularly in St. Martin. So I'm going to, having said I'm a loss adjuster, I'm going to try and give a perspective of what's happening in the insurance industry worldwide, and particularly how it's affecting the region, which is, in my view, very strange developments going on. So my objectives are: one, overview of the worldwide property insurance market; two, the consumer's attitude to property insurance in terms of cover and claims; and identified educational shortfalls where I think the media has a role to play going forward. The worldwide property insurance market. Surprising to most of you, I'm sure, despite the regional destruction experienced last year in the Caribbean, 2 Cat 5s, as Mas Franklin has said. Going into last year, property rates worldwide, and particularly in the Caribbean, were historically low. And even though right after the hurricane we heard the big reinsurers like Munich Re and Swiss Re talk about, yes, we're going to increase rates. Certainly in Jamaica, property rates have not increased by more than 15%, 1-5. And the reason behind that relatively small increase is because of worldwide financial factors, as of course one would appreciate. The insurance industry is part of the financial world. We have very low worldwide interest rates, and consequently there's a lot of capital seeking better returns than one can get from stock exchange or financial instruments. As a consequence, added to that, I should say, first of all, the reduction in financial regulations have allowed non-insurance providers, non-financial houses, to jump into the reinsurance sector and offer very, very, very low rates. For example, the venture capital funds have established entities in places like Bermuda and Cayman seeking returns, because instead of getting 2 or 3% return on capital, devising the right sort of insurance instrument, they can look at 10, 15, 20% returns. And from a Caribbean perspective, even though we say, oh, there were big losses in the Northern Caribbean, Virgin Islands, St. Martin, etc., from a worldwide perspective, the accumulation of insured values in the Caribbean is minuscule. And consequently, the general feeling is that unless New York or Florida as a whole got hit by a category 4 or 5, causing $100 billion, $150 billion worth of losses, we're not going to see any real increase in rates. As a loss adjuster, I have had to be dealing with the people who do carry property insurance. And even though it's a balancing act to try and be fair on both sides, the insurance industry as well as the people who have the insurance, the policyholders, there is a general perception, particularly in a loss situation, where until they have a claim, they don't appreciate the penalties in property policies for underinsurance, which means that if you underinsure your property as opposed to what it's really worth at the time, you're going to get severely penalized. They don't understand that the first 2% or 5% of the sum insured on their policy is a self-insurance limit that insurers do not pay out. They then don't understand that quite a lot of the property they thought was insured is not insured. And then, with all those surprises, they also have to deal with the fact that either the intermediaries with whom they have to go through or the insurance companies themselves, they feel have an unsympathetic view towards the policyholders where they're making claims. as a consequence, what I have seen over the last 10, 12 years, certainly in Jamaica, are that outside of persons or entities that have a financial obligation to a bank or other financial institution and therefore must insure, increasingly people are not renewing or effecting property insurance because they feel that it's election against them, and when they have a claim, they don't feel that they've got equity. So even though the rates are low, there is a very low, what insurers call a penetration. Less and less people are insuring. Educational shortfalls. It is my opinion that much of the foregoing negative consumer attitudes stem from an inadequate communication of what insurance products are available and the scope of cover provided. And although ultimately it's the underwriters who provide the cover, the Caribbean is a broker-agent-dominated industry. In other words, most people who buy insurance go through either an agent or broker. In the Northeastern Caribbean last year, what I was very, very surprised about it, really, I just couldn't understand. We found that most of the people who had insured through an agent or a broker, when they came to lodging a claim, the agent or broker was nowhere to be seen, leaving the policyholder to its own devices to try and get settlement, and that, of course, put a lot of people off. It was the first time a lot of them, for example, in one particular company we dealt with, realized that their policy was not on a replacement value basis, but a market value. So all claims that they submitted were subject to depreciation. It didn't go down well. Other considerations. The prevailing low premium rates are having a detrimental effect on the viability of both the regional insurers and the intermediaries. Why? Premium rates are going down, less people are insuring. As a consequence, the amount of premium being booked is reducing, although both sets of entities have fixed and increasing overheads. Again, if I can use experience out of the Northeastern Caribbean from last year, particularly in St. Martin, there was so much damage to property that was caused by either they were exposed to the sea, right on the seafront, and/or inferior construction. We saw buildings in St. Martin where the exterior walls were what they called concrete board, which was plyboard with a dash of concrete on the outside. But what is happening with the reduced premium volumes coming in, even though insurers in that market got terribly hit last year, some of them, I think, may have paid a 1.5 to 2 billion US. I have been amazed to see those same underwriters come back in the market this year with only slightly increased premium rates and offering wider cover because of their need to generate income to stay viable. With all of that, when one attempts to look at the regional insurance industry, and I've spoken just yesterday to the head of the Insurance Association in Jamaica, reduced premium volumes are exacerbated by the fact that the regional insurance market only retains approximately 5 to 10% of the premiums written. In other words, reinsurers take 90 to 95% of the premiums, and therefore very little is left for the local regional underwriting industry, insurance industry, to be able to afford their own survival, much as putting money into the education or trying to say to people, you have to improve, deal with climate change. It's just not happening right now. And I don't see in the foreseeable future, if everything I've said before continues, I don't see it happening. From the CBU standpoint, I think it is important, and I think the insurance industry would welcome an opportunity to partner with the CBU to improve the educational aspect of insurance and the effect of climate change, etc., for this region, which is susceptible now, and as all the previous panelists have said, is only going to get more and more susceptible to hurricane because of climate change and rising sea levels, as well as the fact that earthquakes, particularly in Jamaica's situation, we are overdue for a major earthquake here for at least 30 years. It's going to happen. But based on what I've said, the insurance industry has its head in the sand and is not going to play any role really in improving the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Just to try to give you my few quick remarks to wrap up. We thought we'd close by pointing to some things where the CBU could be the catalyst for effecting improvements. And I'd like to draw a little bit on the lunchtime presentation, where Professor Clayton pointed out a whole range of things that are happening. And I think one of the lessons from his talk, which I actually a little after chat with him, is you can't get the things improved in many fields, including the field of cybersecurity, earthquake and hurricane loss reduction, without a very progressive regulatory framework, whether it's your building standard and code, the strength to which you design your antenna systems, assumptions about continuity of power supply. Those things come back to standards and regulatory mechanisms. It does seem to me, again, and the first presentation this morning from the I think it's called the CCCR, was full of issues that reverberated and ricocheted with regulatory references. Who is the regulator? Is it going to be the broadcasting regulator, the spectrum management regulator, the regulator for buildings? Is it going to fall to the emergency management authorities, many of whom operate on a shoestring? The conversation about some of these issues simply hasn't started in many Caribbean territories, or is at a very low state in some. I remember in 1987 when I was assigned to Antigua to work with the PCD PPP, it was the CBU and CANA who assisted me in getting the first regional simultaneous broadcast running for the pure reason to try to get the conversation going about how the region would deal with responding. And out of that, we ended up with a regional response system and to some extent, CDERA and then CDEMA. And I wanted to share the story of CDERA with you because when we tried to set up CDERA, what became CDERA, it was the prime ministers of the region who said, we do not want a long-term management entity. We want a short-term response and relief entity. It took us 30 years, I think, to get that improved upon. So one of the areas I want to appeal to the CBU about is that without a progressive regulatory frame, without a system where knowledge is the basis, the knowledge and evidence is the base of what we do, where we are buying into the vision of the 5 Cs and the climate change scientists or the regional seismologists in terms of what the exposures are. The risk reduction and resilience building is going to take a long time. This region has long appreciated its exposure, certainly to hurricanes, and I refer to this article I wrote in 2016. When the British came to St. Kitts, they camped on the beach. The local people who we choose to call Carib, even though they have a different name for themselves, came when they saw low clouds and the surf rolling in a particular way and suggested they come off the beach and move inland uphill. The British refused. Finally, the chief came down and said, at least send the women and children inland, which they did. Well, when the hurricane did arrive, it destroyed the British ships, it did a lot of damage. And their immediate action, those who survived, was to find the Carib chief and hang him for witchcraft. So that we really need to understand that this is a region which, for various cultural reasons, is reluctant sometimes to face the obvious and take early, strategic, and timely action. We hope, looking back at last year's events, systematically unpackaging them and looking hard at the lessons to be learned and applying those lessons will help in some of the areas which have been referred to today, whether it's energy issues to do with why, generally speaking, antenna systems are left out and get destroyed. And Dr. Trott shared with me the experience of dealing with the Cubans who said, our antennas don't get destroyed. We pull them down before the hurricanes arrive. And those are hard decisions to make because it's not easy to go out on the strength of the forecast we get from the meteorologists and begin dismantling the antenna systems. But at least one country in the region does it and benefits from it. So I hope the focus for the day will help. This is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And I do hope, in fact, that the remarks that we've made here will help to see us improve on the performance when the next round of Category 5 events arrive, or the seismic event, which we all hope won't be in our lifetime, but probably will be. So thanks for your attention, and I'll turn you back over to the moderator.
Thank you. I hope you all heard the offer that I heard. Sometimes I think I understand climate science more than I understand insurance. But Mr. Banks at the end offered to work with the CBU to explain insurance and reinsurance to our stakeholders. And I think coming out of what we did last year and going into what Dr. Stevenson described, we have to protect ourselves as much as we can. And the onus is on us to explain better to our individuals and persons in the region. Thank you, Elon Parkinson, for joining us again at the head table. Elon comes to you this afternoon with over 10 years' experience in journalism, public relations, and corporate communications. He's currently the Regional Communications Manager at Digicel, having served as Head of Public Relations for its Jamaica operations. Prior to joining Digicel, Elon worked at Lime Jamaica as Corporate Communications Manager, where he played a key role in improving the public perception and promotional appeal of the brand. His sojourn into journalism spans senior roles with Nationwide 90 FM and CVM Television in Jamaica. Elon has been called upon by BBC, Al Jazeera, CBC, and other overseas media outlets for commentary and analysis of local issues, and I'm sure after today he will be called upon by many regional media outlets as well. Elon?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And I think the CBU has shone a light on a very important topic, one that still needs to be spoken about, one that needs to be practically evangelized, not only among us as media partners, but certainly when it comes on to the public in general, getting people aware as to the tremendous effects of climate change. I must admit that when I heard about the theme for this year's CBU General Assembly, or AGM, I thought to myself, what an interesting angle to take. But then, coming from the field of journalism, you're always looking for that angle with the most searing and impactful points that you can make. But it's not just about point making, it's also about ensuring that the peoples of the region are properly educated about the dire impacts of climate change. And for us at Digicel, it's just the same. We understand it as much as we did about 7 or 8 years ago, when the concept of the greenest building in the Caribbean came into being. And what you're looking at on screen is the southern face of our global headquarters. It's in the downtown Kingston along the waterfront. For those of you who would have landed days ago, if you looked to your left while you were landing, you'd have seen it right there on the waterfront. Can't miss it at all. Greenest building in the Caribbean. And what does that mean? It means that we were looking ahead not only for a location for our headquarters, but also to ensure that we set a standard for how we set up global operations in a green building. The building that you're looking at has some pretty unique features. I'm not able to click through, so I'll just ask that you, yeah, green, but it's not happening. Right, so we opened this building in 2013. It currently houses just over 1,000 employees. Perfect, right? Greenest building in the Caribbean. And among the features, low water consumption, right? Fluorescent and LED sensors, heat exchanger, and a building management system for energy savings. Now, low water consumption is self-evident, but I'll go a little further to tell you about the tremendous storage. That green patch, those green patches towards the front of the building, really below them we have some huge wells. In fact, we've drilled about 67 feet below the surface in order to get to good water that we use on premises. It is still filtered, that we use as drinking water. Then there's also gray water that we use for the purposes of the lavatories, right? So nothing is really wasted at this building. I'll go a little bit later on into the numbers. LED lighting with sensors. One of the things I like to say about our building is that when you're there, you feel almost as if it's a living, breathing thing. Sounds a bit scary, but in the sense that because of the amount of sensors that are placed within the building to ensure that energy management, water usage in general and utilities usage in general are always kept in check. You know, if you move from one place to the next, you're not using a particular service, then it shuts down. You know, you enter a room, the lights come on. If after 15 minutes there's no movement, the lights go off. We even have air conditioning that you can set for your particular area, even though you're in a large room. And all of those things help to reduce the energy consumption and our carbon footprint, right? There's a heat exchanger that's located towards building number 4, which would be to the extreme left on your screen. And that's where we have a bunch of systems and my gosh, the name just escaped me. But there's an extraction system there that removes heat from the building and replaces it with cold air conditioning, but in a way that uses water. Again, the water that we drill from the wells to create this chilling system, right? There's a building management system for energy saving. And what that means is that the facilities management team, and they are the dedicated team who are responsible for maintenance and the overall energy saving program at the head office, they can, from any location, they can remotely turn off lights, air conditioners, adjust sensors. Of course, security systems are including in terms of doors and access, and even reducing the amount of time a door takes to open and close in order to, of course, conserve on air conditioning and subsequently energy, and consequently energy. Right. So some energy saving features. The solar cooling absorption chiller that I told you about earlier, right? It's rated at 430 kilowatts output capacity, right? And it's reducing our cooling costs by between 15 and 20%. The CO2 emission reduction is, of course, evident, and the average kilowatt produced per year is about 80,000. And we expect to get ROI on that within 6 years. Since the building was set up in 2013, we're talking about by next year, we begin, of course, to receive the net benefits of it. Let me just jump back a little bit and show you something on this building. Those panels that you're seeing there, the louvers going down, looks nice and makes it look a little bit space age. But what they also do is that they direct light into the building, the maximum amount of light that can be directed into the building, and that way we cut down on the cost of lighting the offices. So it looks kind of cool, and it really also keeps the sun out, but in a way it gets the light in. So solar photovoltaic panels, we have those right along 1, 2, 3, all those lower buildings right there on the top where they're gray. They are adorned with photovoltaic panels, and those panels, of course, they do the heating of water for the washrooms, and as well for some systems that require hot water to make them run. There is also the LED lighting that we spoke about, and energy reduction there the savings on LED lighting run, I think, closer to around 40% based on what one could end up consuming as a result of using incandescent or even fluorescent for that matter. Now, curtain walls installation, this is helping us to reduce the interior temperature of the office building. And these are walls that are set up in between offices, and they're also at areas just outside the elevators to ensure that it's almost like a two-stage system when it comes on to, preserving the temperature in one area and another. And the building has foam wall installation, which assists with the interior cooling. So the wind turbines, which are located right atop the building, they're part of the signature feature of the downtown landscape, putting out about 10 kilowatts per hour, and they reduce our carbon footprint and also the demand from the JPS. This may not be good news to them, but we're pumping out about 80,000 kilowatts a year, and we're within a year of getting the ROI from those wind turbines. And as I mentioned earlier, we recycle the rainwater and we use it for 120 toilets that are located at the facility. And we also use rainwater for the cooling tower, and that's also contributing to the air conditioning. And the glass windows that are a huge part of the building, it is about, I think on the outside it's about 70% glass. The sunlight is relied upon to illuminate the office space. And of course there's motion sensor lighting to ensure that when people are not at work, they are of course not, creating a carbon footprint that, we would not desire. So what all of these features of the building help us to do is to ensure that the average kilowatt consumption per month is 340,000 kilowatt hours, and that is quite a lot to keep our operations going and of course to keep the costs low. I recall when we had moved into the building, when all of the energy and utilities savings features were not up yet, there was a water bill from the NWC that totaled over $1 million for a month. And shortly after that, when all of the energy saving and the water saving initiatives were put in place, we got a water bill just over $100,000. So much so that the head of facilities management at the time was very pleased with himself. He framed both bills as, certainly, a celebration of an achievement, not only for himself, but also for the company. So we pay very little to the NWC, and again, they may not be too pleased about that. But what this is all telling you is that, if companies begin to invest from very early in these systems, and it's not just about investing incrementally, if from the very start you say, look, this is the mission that we're on, because that's what we did when we were setting up the building, then it's easier to put it into all of the operations, because at least you know from the beginning, from a foundational standpoint, that look, we're going to build a green building and this is what it's going to look like. There's always a challenge of retrofitting existing buildings, because then the capex is a lot more for that. But when you look at the overall savings for us as a result of the energy features, it's 15%. And of course, once we get into year 6, the incremental savings will go up. And the cost to install the energy saving features between 12 and 15%. The cost of the building was circa 10 million US dollars. So you're talking about anywhere between 1.2 to 1.5 million US dollars being spent on those energy saving systems alone that are going to be paying us off tremendously within another 12 to 18 months or so. Now, we like to consider ourselves as not only a mobile operator, but as a modern, advanced communications and entertainment provider. And so, in a way, we cross paths with our friends in the Caribbean Broadcasting Union. We have similar systems. Certainly, a company called Loop, a media arm, online media, falls under the Digicel umbrella. And as such, they too have to deal with the challenges of climate change. Thankfully, they are located in a green building, but then that doesn't stop there. There is scope, for instance, for members of the CBU to also look at how you house your data for disaster recovery services, for instance. So when I started out in radio, there was a huge server in a room that was a repository for all of the clips, right? You want a clip, you, of course, on your computer, and you can search server A, B, or C, or whatever, and you find the clip, and of course, you insert it in a news story. And of course, that was a great repository, because then what it meant was that, you know, finding information was that much easier. But then I remembered within months of joining Nationwide Radio, there was a hurricane, and I had to, you know, sleep at the radio station, and, you know, you're up all night giving updates and all that kind of stuff. And I wondered to myself, well, you know, we're on generator power, but what if something happens and we just can't get to this server, you know, to get the information that we need to share with members of the public? Because what would happen is that we would get the reports from the Met Office and from the local authorities, and, you know, we would have to record them, run them through, cut the clips, and of course send them out in newscasts, right? But then if this server somehow ended up being submerged as a result of the rising tide, then what would happen? You know, a radio station with years of information would have just lost it right there, right? And so part of what we also do to help broadcasters, companies to be climate smart, is to offer disaster recovery services. We have the Caribbean's only Tier 3 data center. It's a highly secure facility that's located just outside of Kingston, about 10 miles from here. And what they do there, just simply amazing. They have server replication, for instance. So the very thing that you have on your server in your media house can be housed right there at the Digicel Tier 3 center, right? It's right there for you on demand when you're ready. I'll give you an example. There's one of the largest companies in Jamaica, Wisynco. They suffered a huge fire about 2 years ago, winding down, right? And as they did, their entire operations were, well, not entire operations, but certainly their warehousing operations were wiped out, right? They had their telephony system in the cloud. And within hours of the fire, all they needed was a new digital phone and an internet connection, and they were back online, able to take orders, talk to clients, let people know that everything is okay, right? Media houses ought to be able to do the very same thing by ensuring that they have a disaster recovery architecture that takes care of that. If you're talking about 21st century broadcasting, if you're talking about being able to go back to a clip that you've been preserving from the 1960s, then you also have to be talking about warehousing all of that very important proprietary information offsite, right? And this is where, you know, we can help. This is where technology can assist in the process. So as we look to continuing to educate our publics about, you know, things that are happening daily, on a daily basis, I want to also recommend that we also look at how we can preserve in order to be able to use it when moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Elon. I did not know that Digicel had a green space. Very fantastic. And because we are just under the time allotted, we do have time for questions. I would say maybe one or two. Not everybody all at once. Just one at a time. There are no questions after I battled so hard. Here, thank you. I c-
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that question. No, because when there was mention of Cat 4 a while ago, and I heard the warning from my friend here, I said, oh boy, we should heed it too. It's a Cat 4, designed to withstand a Cat 4 hurricane.
Just a quick feedback on that, because that's a very important question. For a very long time in the Caribbean, we have been probably under-designing because our actual instrumentation for high wind speeds has been much more sketchy than most people realize. I came upon this about 20 or 30 years ago because it was brought to my attention by the engineers that the instruments that were set up in the Met Services to record peak wind speeds could only measure up to about 150. Now, don't quote me on that one. But typically, what you get in many Caribbean islands is a notation saying the instrument was destroyed or recorded its maximum. Now, if you think your way through logically, if a hurricane wind speed gets to the maximum the instrument can record, you actually don't know what the peak was. And this is a very important sort of single piece of information for your engineers to work to unpackage. Because we were surprised for a while that it was a regular feature of Eastern Caribbean hurricanes in particular that we'd lose the police radio antennas. It turned out they were buying antennas through the Crown agents, which were designed for the British police, and in Britain you design to a very low maximum, but don't have hurricanes. So there are all kinds of assumptions built into, again, I speak about culture, the engineering culture in the region in the past gave a lot of weight to what the engineering culture in the metropolitan country was. And there are lots of assumptions made about building loading and building performance that need to be reevaluated. It's my understanding, for instance, I don't know if Paul wants to comment on this, that last year in Hurricanes Irma and Maria, the metal hurricane shutters did particularly badly because they were actually designed for low peak winds. I don't know what the numbers are, but I've been surprised on my communication with some of the people in here in Jamaica that they haven't really caught up on that bit of news yet. So I don't know, Paul, did you observe any of this? But my understanding was that in the Eastern Caribbean, people are now looking hard at the metal shutters because they didn't seem to work. So this is an important item to respond to if you're
In St. Martin, what amazed me in terms of shutters, I think going back to a hurricane that occurred maybe 20 years ago, based on that experience, for want of a better phrase, even the poorest structure had hurricane shutters. But in terms of what survived the Cat 5 hurricane that went through, the accordion type shutters were the best from what I saw. The sort of shutters that you see in Jamaica, the usual ones, are when people use plywood. That isn't going to do anything, nothing at all. And if I just make very quickly, and everybody wants to leave, something that amazed us in St. Martin specifically was that they really haven't heard of a hurricane strap. And here is an island that has even not a brush historically of a hurricane every 4 or 5 years. And I think we saw, out of the 600 claims we did, I think we saw hurricane straps on 2 buildings. So, things to be learned.
Thank you. Any final question? One follow-up question?
Yeah, one more. Obviously, you talked extensively on hurricanes and earthquakes, but of course, water, whether it's tsunami or storm surge, is pretty critical. And clearly, I don't think the population in the Caribbean is prepared for that. But getting back to, did you tell what elevation is that data center at? and the central offices?
All right, so I'm going to invite you down to the building, first of all. And one of the things we did, understanding that, of course, there could be the possibility of storm surges whenever we have a natural disaster such as a hurricane or storm, is to elevate the building. So the ground floor, the building has been elevated, I think, about maybe 16 or 17 feet. So ground floor for us is 16 or 17 feet above above ground. And so with that, we're able to now have underground parking and storage facilities, all of that. We use the space wisely, but at the same time understanding the terrestrial issues and geographical issues that can affect it. The Tier 3 center, Cat 5 and beyond, highly secure, and facilitated in such a way that it can run on its own for a very long period of time in order to properly protect the data that it houses.
Great.
Just a quick comment. In
Mr.
theory,
McDonald?
there is a tsunami response arrangement in the region. In practice, very few people seem to know about it. And that again includes, it seems, many of the broadcasting facilities. But certainly for the last 5-8 years, SEDEMA has had a regional tsunami protocol. And every year in March, it's tested. And I think if the broadcasting fraternity is not on the inside of that loop, then that represents a major item to be corrected. Because the arrangements have been made for the responsibility for tsunami warnings to be transferred from Hawaii, where it now resides, to Puerto Rico, with a complementary facility in Barbados, which is to serve as the information focal point. Why the transfers take place, I can't answer. I'm a retired guy who just knows that there is a arrangement. And the secondary issue is, when the warnings are issued, what are the reference points on land which are used for the calculations? To give an example, typically if you get the tsunami warning from the Hawaii Center, it will give you locations on run-up heights. Back in 2010, when there was a strong earthquake in Haiti, the warning center did provide a notice for Jamaica, which is an adjacent island to Hispaniola where the earthquake was. But I was later informed by the Hawaii authorities that they did not have any information in their database to indicate that there were Jamaicans resident on the Pedro or Morant Keys. They didn't know about those keys. So one assumes that in the 8 years since, the Hawaii Tsunami Warning Center, which is responsible still for the Caribbean because the transfer to Puerto Rico, University of Mayagüez, has not apparently taken place. One assumes that keys occupied by fishermen are now on their list to be subject to the specific calculation of wave run-up. Because if you're a fisherman on the Morant or Pedro Keys, you don't have a lot of hill to run up in the case of even a small tsunami.
Look, and just before I go, news just in.
You are going to
from
make me lose my position.
No, no, no.
As
I have to.
twin
No, I have
field
to
marshal.
clarify. I have to clarify this one, right? It's Category 5, right? The Digicel building in downtown Kingston, it can withstand a Category 5 hurricane. Just got the update from our facilities management head. He says Cat 5 actually the highest categorization of hurricane, in his words. Thank you.
Thank you. And you are still invited to visit the Digicel building on his behalf. Thank you, everyone. I think we had a really interesting discussion. And if I'd invite you to thank the panelists. But because I can as well, I'm going to take my 10 seconds here. You can only make good decisions with good information. Our story, our information. Please visit the 5Cs Clearinghouse, clearinghouse.caribbeanclimate.bz. Please sign up and join our blog. We also accept articles from media houses across the region. Thank you.
I'm going to say to my twin that she retains her rank because she almost got us back on time, but we are not quite on time, and we have some exhibitors, some persons who have some information that is really valuable to all of us, and we want to give them appropriate time to get that. So what we're going to do is we're going to thank our moderator and our panelists and invite them to go down, and we're going to invite our other participants for this last exhibitors forum to come on up and join us. In the meantime, folks, grab your coffee and return to the table. So, all change. Exhibitors, come on up. In fact, I'm minded. I note that there's more persons than spaces. So the first one on the list, you have your running order for this forum. Who's first on the list? I believe it's Utelsat, am I correct? Right, Guillermo, you come on up, and Anthony. And then Anthony will continue the run. So in 2 minutes' time, we will be ready to rock and roll. That's correct?
So give it 2 minutes. Give it 2 minutes. Where are you from? Mexico? Where's your company based? Paris. Okay. So, how long have you been doing business in the Caribbean? Branch on the Caribbean. So where's your office for the Caribbean? Oh, you're Mexico? Yeah. Okay.